Day 1. I move in. Day 1. She calls the sheriff on me. I bought an abandoned mountain house, but the moment I stepped onto my own porch, the HOA president told me it was still hers and called the police on me every single day. That's when I realized this wasn't a mistake. It was a setup. If you've ever stood your ground against nonsense like this, stick around and hit subscribe for more real justice on the frontier. I reached the end of Elk Ridge Road just before dusk, the mountain shadows already swallowing the valley. The old cabin sat ahead, my cabin, leaning slightly under the weight of 3 forgotten winters, but still holding its shape like an aging boxer refusing to go down. I killed the engine of my truck and stepped out, gravel crunching under my boots. The house was supposed to be empty, untouched, abandoned for years. But something was wrong the moment I saw the front porch. A crisp white notice was nailed to the doorframe, too clean and too new to have survived the winter storms. The heading was printed in bold letters: Elk Ridge Preservation HOA, Temporary Stewardship Order. My stomach tightened. There was no HOA in my purchase documents. No encumbrances. Nothing except a deed clean enough for a lawyer to eat off of. I pulled the notice free, reading each line twice. According to this order, the home was under active supervision by the HOA until community preservation standards were met. It sounded official, but also like something a petty tyrant would draft at their kitchen table. I didn't hear her approach. "You must be Cole Harrington," a woman said from behind me. I turned. A blonde woman in her late 50s stood at the bottom of the steps, one gloved hand resting lightly on the railing as if the house belonged to her. She wore a slate-gray winter coat, buttoned to the neck, and a smile practiced in mirrors. "I'm Marcia Delroy," she continued, "president of the Elk Ridge Preservation HOA. I kept my voice steady. I wasn't told there was an HOA here. "Oh, there isn't. Not officially," she said with a dismissive wave. "We're a heritage group. We maintain old mountain properties so they don't fall into neglect. And this cabin," she gestured casually behind me, "has been under our care for months." My jaw clenched. "I bought this house 2 weeks ago. Cashier's checks, title transfer, county stamp. It's mine." Her smile widened, but her eyes didn't warm. "I know, Cole, but you can't move in just yet. Preservation law requires a stewardship review when a property has been abandoned for longer than 30 months. This house falls under that rule." Something crawled under my skin. A law? A stewardship review? She acted like I was trespassing. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "You don't have authority over my property." "Oh, but I do," she replied, tone softening into condescension. "This house is still mine, legally speaking. Not for ownership, of course, but for stewardship. Until the review is completed, no occupant can enter." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. She gave none. The deed in my jacket suddenly felt heavier than my own body. Months of searching, the financial strain, the hope of a new beginning, all crashing into a wall built entirely from her smug expression. Without a word, I brushed past her and pushed open the door. She gasped softly. "Cole, if you enter, you'll be in violation of the stewardship order." "I'm entering my house," I said, stepping inside. Her voice sharpened. "Then you leave me no choice." The interior smelled faintly of dust and old pine. My boots echoed in the empty living room. I took another step toward the hallway when I heard the sound. Sharp, decisive, mechanical. Marcia dialing her phone. "Yes, Sheriff Dalton. This is Marcia Delroy. I need an officer dispatched immediately. We have an unauthorized entry at the old Ridgeview cabin." She paused, eyes locking with mine through the doorway. "Yes, the new buyer. He's refusing to comply with preservation law." I felt disbelief snap into something colder. She ended the call without looking away. "They'll be here in 20 minutes," she said quietly. "You really should have waited for the review, Cole. That's not how property law works. That's how our law works." I stepped fully inside the living room, an act of defiance as much as necessity. The floor creaked beneath me. Outside, the last light faded behind the ridge. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. How could a woman I met 30 seconds ago act so certain my house belonged to her? But then another thought surfaced, one far more unnerving. Why did she act like this wasn't the first time she'd done it? The sheriff's cruiser headlights appeared on the distant road, growing brighter, climbing the hill toward my porch. Whatever this was, it wasn't a misunderstanding, and Marcia's confidence suggested she expected to win. Sheriff Ray Dalton stepped out of his cruiser before the engine even finished idling. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, built like someone who had once broken up bar fights and now broke up neighbor disputes. His flashlight beam cut across the snow until it landed on me, standing in my own doorway. "Evening," he said, voice neutral. "Got a call about unauthorized entry." I forced the deed into his hand before he took another step. "Sheriff, I purchased this property legally. I have the transfer documents, the keys, the settlement sheet, everything." Marcia appeared behind him like a shadow that had been waiting its cue. "Sheriff, he's trespassing under our stewardship order. The preservation law clearly requires an occupancy freeze." "Marcia," I cut in, "there is no freeze. There is no authority. You don't own this house." Dalton lifted a hand. "Both of you, slow down, one at a time." He studied my deed with squinting eyes, running a thumb across the notary stamp. His expression shifted, barely, but I caught it. A flicker of something that looked uncomfortably close to sympathy. Then he looked at Marcia. "You filed a caretaker claim?" Her smile returned instantly, polished and patient. "Of course. We've cared for this home for months. And until the review is completed, no new owner can occupy it. You know this, Ray." Ray exhaled through his nose. "It's a civil matter. I can't remove him, and I can't remove you either." He handed the deed back to me. "Document everything. If this goes to court, you'll both need proof." Marcia's jaw twitched at the word proof, but she stayed silent. Ray gave me a long, evaluating look. "I'll be back if I get another call." Then he drove off, taillights glowing like faint warnings through the tree line. I thought that would be the end of it for the night. But it was only the beginning. The next morning, just after sunrise, the pounding started. 3 sharp knocks. I opened the door to find Sheriff's Deputy Morrow, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Harrington, we received a report of illegal occupancy again." "From who?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. I held up the deed. She barely glanced at it. "I have to log the call. Just letting you know." She left. 5 minutes later, Marcia walked by the house without looking at me, like someone inspecting her garden. At noon, another cruiser arrived. Noise disturbance. At 3, another, unsafe heating methods. By sunset, I had 6 visits documented. Each officer was polite, uncomfortable, and obviously trapped in a system that took HOA complaints as gospel. By day 2, the rhythm became predictable. Day 3, it became personal. Not because of the police, because of the eyes. The same white SUV passed by the house 3 times in 1 hour. Volunteers I'd never met stood at the end of my driveway snapping pictures of my license plate. Someone left a bright orange violation warning on my porch about unauthorized woodpile placement, whatever that meant. Every attempt to step outside was met with cameras, whispers, and that same cold certainty in Marcia's expression. "You won't last." On the 4th morning, as I stepped outside with a notebook to record yet another HOA notice, I noticed someone leaning on the fence beside my truck. Tessa Crane. Tessa was a local rancher I'd met once at the general store. Quiet, practical, the type who'd survived enough winters to know what mattered and what didn't. She watched the HOA volunteers down the hill, arms folded across her jacket. "You're not the first," she said. I tightened my grip on the notebook. "That's supposed to make me feel better?" "Supposed to make you pay attention," she replied. "3 families before you. Same pattern. They buy a property up here. HOA shows up with this preservation nonsense. Daily complaints, patrols, reports. First month breaks them. They sell. Cheap. And guess who buys?" She nodded toward a white SUV now circling for the 3rd time today. "Marcia?" I asked. "Not directly. Someone she works with." Tessa lowered her voice. "She treats these houses like their inventory." The wind cut across the ridge, but the cold inside me wasn't from the weather. "She told me she had legal authority," I said. "She lies like she breathes," Tessa said. And Ray's stuck in the middle. He knows something's off, but without paperwork, his hands are tied. I looked at the pile of violation slips on my porch. She won't stop. Exactly. She wants you tired, angry, desperate. Desperate people sell. I swallowed hard. The truth of it hit clean and sharp. Tessa started back toward her truck. "Cole, whatever you do next needs to be smart. They've played this game for years." I watched her drive off, her taillights fading into the bends of the mountain road. Inside, I spread the violation slips across the dining table. 16 of them already. All dated. All signed by HOA volunteers. All baseless. And then one paper stopped me cold. At the bottom of an orange slip, yesterday's notice, was a line of text I hadn't seen before. "Filed pursuant to Elk Ridge Caretaker Application Number 14D, Caretaker Application." My pulse kicked. I grabbed my laptop, opened the county portal, and typed the phrase into the database. The screen loaded slowly, then popped up a PDF of a scanned form. Applicant: Marcia Delroy. Filing date: 5 days before my closing date. Purpose: temporary stewardship of abandoned mountain property. I stared at the timestamp. This wasn't a misunderstanding. She'd filed this before she even knew me. And the biggest question hit me with the force of a hammer. How did she know the house would go up for sale before I bought it? The scheme wasn't random. It was planned. And if Tessa was right, I wasn't the first target. A cruiser pulled into my driveway again, lights flashing. 4th time today. Same complaint, same pattern. I closed the laptop, anger giving way to something steadier, colder, with edges sharp enough to cut through every lie Marcia had handed me. If she wanted a paper war, I could fight one. But I needed to understand the battlefield first. And starting tomorrow, I planned to learn exactly how deep her operation went. I didn't have to wait long. At 6:12 a.m., before the sun cleared the ridge, a car horn blared outside. I jolted awake, stepped to the window, and saw 2 SUVs parked at the mouth of my driveway. Both white, both with magnetic Elk Ridge Preservation Volunteers signs slapped onto their doors. 3 people stood beside them, clipboards in hand. A 4th aimed a camera at my porch. The harassment wasn't creeping anymore. It was marching. I threw on my jacket and walked outside. One of the volunteers, a man with a gray beard and the posture of someone who enjoyed rulebooks more than human conversation, lifted a hand. "Sir, we're conducting a compliance walkthrough." "For what law?" I demanded. He tapped his clipboard. "Preservation Regulation 4B, routine visual inspection." I stepped closer. "On a house I own?" He didn't blink. "Ownership is in dispute." My fists tightened, but anger wouldn't help me. Evidence would. I pulled out my phone and started filming. "Name, please." He turned away without answering. Another volunteer, short, middle-aged, approached the woodpile stacked by my fence. She snapped a photo, scribbled something, then slapped another orange violation sheet to my gate. Unauthorized hazardous material storage. Wood. Firewood. She marked it as hazardous. The third volunteer walked to the back of my truck, photographing the Colorado plates like she was documenting a fugitive. "All right," I said loudly. "You're all trespassing. I'm recording this. If you set foot past that fence, I call the sheriff." The gray-bearded man smirked. "Sheriff Dalton already knows. HOA compliance takes priority." Then they left, slowly, deliberately, making sure I understood. This was ritual, not randomness. By mid-morning, the HOA hotline had logged 3 more calls. I didn't need access to the recordings to know who made them. A deputy I'd never met, Lopez, showed up around noon, tapping nervously on my door. "Mr. Harrington," he said, shifting awkwardly, "we've received several reports about improper storage, vehicle obstruction, and possible boundary encroachments." "Boundary encroachments?" I asked. "I haven't touched a thing." He looked embarrassed. "I know, but we still have to respond." I stepped outside and pointed at the road. "Deputy, do you see any obstruction, any hazard?" He lowered his voice. "Between us, no. But I'm obligated to speak with you whenever a call comes in." "How many calls today?" He hesitated. 4. I scanned the ridge. That white SUV sat parked beneath the pines, observing. The harassment wasn't just petty. It was coordinated, relentless, designed to drain energy and morale. Exactly what Tessa had warned me about. Deputy Lopez left apologetically, and 30 minutes later, another violation sheet was taped to my porch. This one marked unsafe occupancy because my lights were on during daylight hours. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Compliance is a community effort. Please cooperate." I clenched my jaw. They wanted fear. They wanted compliance. They wanted surrender dressed as accommodation. Not going to happen. By afternoon, I'd collected 12 new violation notices. I spread them across the dining table like battlefield artifacts. The language was formal, but the pattern underneath it was unmistakable. An HOA weaponizing paperwork to bleed an owner dry. I needed clarity, data, proof. So I tried something simple. I followed the paper trail. On the back of each violation slip was a tiny printed number, inspected pursuant to application number 14D. I pulled up the county's online archive again and dug deeper into Marcia's caretaker filing. There were attachments I hadn't noticed before. The first one was a handwritten note scanned into the system. Urgent recommendation. Assign temporary stewardship due to neglect and risk of structural decay. Signed, M. Delroy. The second attachment was more interesting. An appraisal form with a faded signature at the bottom. Appraiser, N. Carver. Neil Carver. The name Tessa had warned me about. A private investor masquerading as a property consultant. I dug further. Carver had completed 4 other pre-purchase evaluations on mountain homes that later suffered the same fate. HOA involvement, complaints, forced sale. And each time Carver's investment company acquired the property within months. The HOA wasn't maintaining heritage. They were manufacturing crises. I printed everything, forms, timestamps, signatures, and clipped them together. It wasn't a full case yet, but it was the beginning of a story the county wouldn't be able to ignore. My phone buzzed again, this time a voicemail. Marcia's voice, smooth as melted ice. "Cole, I hope you understand resistance only hurts the community. We'll continue monitoring the property until you comply with the stewardship review. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." She hung up before I could say a word. Harder than it needs to be. That phrase rattled through my chest like a warning and a promise. Just before sunset, I stepped outside for air and saw Tessa walking up the road again. Her jaw was tight, her boots kicking up dust as she approached. "They sent volunteers to my ranch today," she said. Asked if I'd testify that you were disturbing the neighborhood. What did you say? She snorted. Told them to get off my land before I showed them what a real boundary dispute looks like. I managed a thin smile. Thank you. She looked toward the cabin. How many notices so far? 12 today. That's nothing, she muttered. They hit the McCready family with 31 in 1 week. 2 months later, they listed the property. Carver scooped it up for half market price. Her voice hardened. You need to understand. You're not dealing with an HOA. You're dealing with a business model. I felt the truth of it settle into me, heavy and undeniable. Then I'll treat it like one. Tessa nodded and jogged back toward her truck. I watched her go, the weight of the day finally settling in my chest. The harassment wasn't slowing. It was accelerating. But so was my resolve. If Marcia wanted a paper war, she'd get one. And I'd make sure every move she made left a trail she couldn't erase. Tomorrow, the investigation began in earnest, and somewhere buried in the county files was the crack I needed to break their entire machine open. I drove into town just after opening hours, wanting to get to the county clerk's office before Marcia, or anyone connected to her, caught wind of what I was doing. The road down from Elk Ridge was a winding descent, but every turn sharpened my focus. If I let her keep control of the narrative, she'd bury me under a mountain of fabricated violations until I either broke or sold, and I wasn't built to break. Inside the clerk's office, the warmth hit me first, then the silence. Only one clerk sat behind the counter, her glasses perched at the edge of her nose, squinting at a computer screen. Morning, I said. I need to pull records for caretaker application number 14D. She froze for a half second, just long enough to tell me she recognized the number. Not good. Name? She asked, businesslike. Cole Harrington. She typed rapidly, the keys clacking in the quiet room. You're the new owner of the Ridgeview property. Her tone carried a hint of sympathy, the kind you hear when people know what you've walked into but aren't allowed to say it outright. That's right, I said. I'd like to see everything connected to that caretaker application, and any related filings, amendments, attachments, whatever you have. She hesitated again. That file's fairly extensive. I'm prepared for that. After a moment, she sighed and disappeared through a back door. When she returned, she carried a thick manila folder, far too thick for something supposed to represent temporary stewardship. She set it on the counter with a weighty thud. You can use the table over there. Make whatever copies you need. I thanked her and took the file to a side table. My pulse kicked as I opened it. Right on top was the form I'd seen online, Marcia's caretaker application. But the physical copy revealed handwritten notes in the margins I hadn't seen before. Recommend immediate site review. Property shows signs of long-term neglect. Appears unclaimed. Initiate preservation protocol. Arrange inspection with Carver. Carver. The second attachment hit harder. A property appraisal form signed by Neil Carver, marked as consultation required. The signature matched the one on the other homes I'd looked up. That meant his fingerprints were on multiple forced sales. But the kicker was buried deeper. A printed email chain between Marcia and Carver, poorly redacted, probably by someone who assumed no buyer would ever look at these files. The subject line read, Opportunity Timeline, Ridgeview Cabin. Carver wrote, Seller appears financially motivated. If we maintain pressure using the typical channels, we can expect listing within 60 to 90 days. Marcia responded hours later. Stewardship order submitted. Volunteers prepped to monitor. My stomach dropped. This wasn't preservation. This wasn't compliance. This was entrapment dressed as policy. They targeted owners before properties even hit the market, filed caretaker claims to create an illusion of control, then harassed buyers until desperation forced them to sell. And Carver capitalized on the fire sale pricing, a hidden land flip pipeline. exactly as Tessa had warned. I copied everything, emails, forms, appraisals, stacking page after page until the clerk glanced at me, eyebrows raising. By the time I finished, I had a binder's worth of evidence that the HOA wasn't an HOA at all. It was a mechanism, a machine. As I packed up, the clerk leaned closer. If you're fighting them, you'll need help. They've never been challenged. Someone has to start, I said. She nodded as if she'd been waiting years for someone to say that. Back at the cabin, the harassment was already waiting for me. A yellow notice taped to my door. Boundary vegetation encroachment. Another on my mailbox. Unauthorized soil displacement. And a third, wedged under my truck's windshield wiper, accusing me of improper snow melt direction. In other words, I couldn't control which way the sun melted the driveway. I stepped inside, tossed the notices onto the table, and unloaded the county documents beside them. The contrast was stark. Marcia's petty violations versus her real crimes. Still, the machine didn't let up. At precisely 2:17 p.m., 2 volunteers appeared again, walking the perimeter with clipboards and phones out. One of them, gray beard from earlier, stood at my fence line. "Mr. Harrington," he called, as if addressing a child, "your presence on the property remains non-compliant until stewardship review concludes." I stepped outside. "I just came from the county clerk's office. Your stewardship claim is based on a law that doesn't apply here." Graybeard smirked. "Disputes go through the HOA board, not the county." "Funny," I said, "because your claim relies on county enforcement." That wiped the smirk clean off his face. "Be careful, Mr. Harrington," he said quietly. "Resistance causes consequences." He walked away with the confidence of someone insulated by a system he believed couldn't be touched. He had no idea that insulation was already cracking. That evening, I heard a knock, not the hostile pounding of a deputy, but a measured, almost cautious rhythm. I opened the door to find Tessa again, leaning on the railing. "You went to the county," she said, not asking. "I needed to see the filings." "And?" I handed her one of the printed emails. She read it slowly. When she finished, she exhaled sharply. "So it's Carver. Again." She shook her head. "They're running the same playbook." She pointed to the driveway, to the constant buzzing of the HOA patrols. "They'll escalate the pressure now that they know you're digging." "Good," I said. "Let them." She studied me, then nodded with a seriousness I hadn't yet seen in her. "Cole, if you really want to fight this, you're going to need more than evidence. You're going to need a lawyer who knows mountain property law inside and out." I'd already been thinking the same thing, and I knew exactly where tomorrow would take me. For now, I stood on my porch, watching the last patrol vehicle glide slowly past, the driver pretending not to stare. They believed they controlled the narrative. They believed I was alone. They were wrong. Because today I'd found the crack, and tomorrow I planned to pry it open until their entire operation collapsed under the weight of its own lies. But that didn't mean they'd let me work in peace. The next morning, the mountain ridge felt too still. No volunteers at dawn, no SUV parked at the bend. Instead, a single violation sheet lay folded neatly against my doorframe, the handwriting oddly careful. "Occupancy review pending. Vacate until further notice." No signature. No timestamp. A warning without a sender. Silence, I realized, wasn't mercy. It was strategy. If harassment hadn't broken me, they were testing something new. Pressure through uncertainty. I grabbed my binder of evidence and headed to Denver. The law office of Evan Blake, tucked between a bail bondsman and an insurance broker, didn't look like the kind of place that unraveled corruption. The door squeaked when I pushed it open. Inside, a man in his 40s with calm eyes and a stack of legal documents towering beside him stood and extended a hand. "You must be Mr. Harrington," he said. Tessa called ahead. That explained his lack of surprise. I handed him the binder. This is everything I've gathered. Harassment, caretaker filings, Carver connections, all of it. He flipped through the pages with quiet attention, marking points with a pencil, but saying nothing. When he reached the email exchange between Marcia and Carver, he stopped. This, he murmured, tapping the page, shouldn't exist. Because it's illegal? I asked. Because it's stupid, he corrected. People running schemes don't usually leave paper trails. He leaned back. The caretaker statute they're abusing. It's ancient, written for abandoned mines. It doesn't apply to residential property, certainly not owner-occupied homes. So they have no authority over me. None, he said plainly. But they're behaving as if they do. That's the danger. Evan continued reading, lips tightening as he paged through violation slips and photos of clipboard patrols. When he finally closed the binder, he exhaled long and slow. Cole, this is systematic. And it's exploited people for years because nobody challenged it with the right tools. What tools? I asked. Documentation, he said. You've done the hard part. Now let me do mine. He stood, paced once across the office, then sat again. I'm going to draft a motion to void Marcia's caretaker claim. It will trigger a review by the county. That alone could freeze her ability to file violations. She's not going to take that quietly, I said. No, he agreed. She'll escalate. People like her always escalate when they sense losing control. I thought of the silent morning, the single folded notice. It felt less like retreat and more like planning. Should I expect things to get worse? I asked. Evan didn't hesitate. Absolutely. He slid the binder back toward me. Keep adding to this. Every interaction, every notice, every police call. Nothing is too small. I nodded. When do we file? By week's end, he said. And when we do, you'll feel the ripples all the way up the mountain. The drive back to Elk Ridge was uneventful. No patrol cars, no HOA volunteers. The road was empty, unnaturally so. When I reached my driveway, something felt wrong, too quiet. I approached the porch and saw the change immediately. 3 new security cameras installed on utility poles facing my cabin. Small, round, black lenses, no HOA logos, no markings. Marcia had upgraded her surveillance. I pulled out my phone and recorded each camera, narrating their positions. As I did, a familiar voice drifted across the road. Just ensuring community safety, Marcia called, walking toward me with a clipboard pressed against her chest. We've had reports of unusual behavior around this property. She didn't say your property. She said this property, like it didn't belong to me. I kept the camera trained on her. According to county files, you have no authority to monitor my land. She didn't blink. Preservation protocols require oversight. Your claim is fraudulent. Her smile sharpened. Careful, Mr. Harrington. Words like that have consequences. So do illegal land schemes, I shot back. Her expression flickered, just for a second, a microsecond crack in her confidence. She recovered quickly. You may want to refrain from false accusations. Stress can cloud judgment, especially when dealing with complicated ownership. She turned and walked away, leaving the words hanging like bait. Complicated ownership. That was a threat dressed as concern. That night, for the first time since I moved in, my phone stayed silent. No violation texts, no HOA emails, no police calls. It should have been a relief. It wasn't. Because silence wasn't defeat. It was calculation. At 11:43 p.m., a pickup slowed in front of my property. Not a volunteer SUV, not a sheriff cruiser. A dark truck with no plates on the front bumper. It paused long enough for me to see the outline of the driver. Then it rolled away. I wrote down the time, the make, the direction it went. When the sun rose the next morning, another folded notice sat on my porch. Occupancy remains under review. Expect increased monitoring. No signature. No legal reference. Just a message. A message from someone who believed I was near my breaking point. But what they didn't know was that the quiet didn't weaken me. It steeled me. Because the silence gave me clarity. A week ago, Marcia thought she controlled everything. Today, she was reacting. And tomorrow, when Evan filed the motion, she would feel the first crack spreading through the foundation she'd built her power on. They believed they were tightening the noose. They didn't realize I was the one pulling it. By the time dawn cracked across the ridge, I was already sorting every piece of documentation on the dining table. Violation slips, timestamps, photos, witness notes. Marcia wanted pressure? She'd get it back tenfold, wrapped in statute numbers and filed under penalty of perjury. At 8:12 a.m., Evan texted, "Be at my office by 10. Bring everything." I left the house with the binder strapped tight, passing under the new surveillance cameras. Their lenses tracked me like tiny black eyes. Good. Let them record. Evidence cuts both ways. At Evan's office, he wasted no time. "We're doing this in layers," he said, spreading legal forms across the desk. "One blow may not stop them, 4 will." He pulled out a printed packet labeled, "Motion to void caretaker status, Elk Ridge, Preservation, HOA. This is the foundation," he explained. "Once filed, the county must investigate. That freezes Marcia's authority." "Good," I said. "What about the land sales?" "Second layer," he replied, sliding forward another file. "Complaint to the State Real Estate Commission. It triggers a financial and procedural review. Land flipping through false stewardship is fraud." I stared at the page. Neil Carver's name repeated down the margin like a watermark of guilt. Evan continued. "Third layer, civil harassment violation. Sheriff Dalton's call logs prove excessive misuse of emergency services." "And the fourth?" I asked. "That's the one they'll never expect," he said, leaning back. "A coordinated document timeline proving intent. If we can show Marcia and Neil filed claims before properties hit the market, it demonstrates premeditation." Premeditation. The word fit too perfectly. Evan flipped open the binder I brought and pointed at one sheet. "This right here. Look at the date. Carver inquired about your parcel 2 weeks before the seller listed it." My jaw tightened. "Meaning he thought he'd acquire it cheap." "Meaning," Evan corrected, "they planned to remove you before you even bought the place." The room felt suddenly smaller. "So what happens when we file?" I asked. Evan didn't soften his answer. "They'll panic. They'll throw everything at you. But that's good. Panic breeds mistakes." Back at the cabin, I began the final phase of documentation. I walked the perimeter with my phone recording. I filmed each violation slip posted on the gate. I documented the cameras again. At the far corner of the property, I spotted something new. Fresh boot tracks in the mud leading up to my side window. Not mine. Not the sheriff's. I snapped photos from multiple angles. Then, as I rounded the porch, a voice cut across the yard. "You sure take a lot of pictures for someone who claims they just want to live in peace." Marcia stood at the end of the walkway, arms folded, lips pulled into a practiced smile. I hit record on my phone. "Everything okay, Ms. Delroy?" I asked. Her eyes flashed. "Not when community safety is at risk. We've had reports of suspicious activity." "That suspicious activity is you. My committee has every right to catalog property conditions. Not on land you don't own." She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a razor-thin whisper. "You think your lawyer scares me? You think paperwork will fix this? You're just another outsider who doesn't understand how things work up here." "Actually," I said, "I'm learning very quickly." Her smile faltered. just for a breath. Then she turned sharply and walked away. The camera on my phone captured everything. That night, I sat at the table reviewing the audio recordings. Footsteps, her voice, the implicit threat, the steady escalation. Each file added another brick to the wall I was building against her. 2 hours past sunset, a truck engine idled near my gate. I stepped outside and saw a single envelope pinned beneath a rock. Inside was a typed notice. Final warning, unauthorized occupancy continues. Expect escalation of enforcement. Again, no signature, no HOA letterhead, just a message designed to intimidate. But intimidation only works if someone is breaking. I wasn't. I scanned the notice, added it to the binder, and wrote the time and location. Tomorrow, Evan would file. Tomorrow, the county clerk would receive the first blow. Tomorrow, everything Marcia built on threats, lies, and loopholes would begin to crumble. I returned to the porch and looked out toward the ridge. In every direction, someone had once felt trapped, forced out, priced out, pressured out. But not me. Not this time. Because while Marcia believed she'd spent a decade perfecting her harassment machine, she'd forgotten something fundamental about machines. Once you understand how they work, you also understand exactly how to take them apart. And that's what tomorrow was for. By 9 a.m., Evan had filed the motion with the county clerk's office. The document froze Marcia's caretaker claim pending review, effectively stripping her of the authority she'd been weaponizing for weeks. He texted me a confirmation. It's filed. Expect fallout. Fallout didn't take long. At 11:16 a.m., a sheriff's cruiser rolled up my driveway for the 6th time in 2 weeks. But this time, the posture was different. Sheriff Ray Dalton didn't step out angry or impatient. He stepped out cautious, measured, almost apologetic. He removed his hat as he approached. "Morning, Cole." "Let me guess," I said. "Another violation complaint?" "2," he admitted. "Noise and—" He paused, reading from his notepad. "Unauthorized hazardous materials storage." I blinked. "Hazardous materials? I'm storing paint cans in the shed." Dalton exhaled through his nose. "That's what I figured, but I've still got to follow up." A week ago, his tone would have been clipped. This time, he looked tired of being dragged into someone else's private war. "Walk me through your shed," he said. We crossed the yard. I opened the door. He scanned the shelves, paint, patching compound, a toolbox, extra boards stacked neatly against the wall. "That's it?" he asked. "That's it." He scribbled a note, then closed the shed door himself. "Nothing hazardous here." There was a shift in his expression, subtle but unmistakable. "You should know something," Dalton said quietly. "The county clerk called the station this morning. There's an active review of Ms. Delroy's caretaker filing. Some sort of irregularity flagged in the documentation." My pulse picked up. "What kind of irregularity?" He shrugged. "Didn't say, but they asked us to stand down on enforcement until they finished the review." That meant one thing. They'd seen something in the paperwork. "Sheriff," I said, "everything she's filed is fraudulent. Every violation, every complaint, every claim." His eyes finally met mine with a seriousness I hadn't seen before. "I'm starting to believe that." Before I could respond, a voice pierced the air behind us. "Sheriff, arrest him!" Marcia stormed up my driveway, waving a stack of papers like she was brandishing a weapon. Her face, normally composed and smug, was flushed with anger. "You're derelict in your duty," she snapped. "He's violating the caretaker statute, threatening public safety, and obstructing preservation efforts." Dalton held up a hand. "Ms. Delroy, I've received notice from the county. I can't enforce anything until—" "You will enforce it," she shouted. "I'm the recognized steward of this property." "Not anymore," Dalton said evenly. "Your claim is under active review." The words hit her like a physical blow. Marcia froze, her eyes widening, the papers trembling in her hand. Review? She repeated. Under review? Who triggered that review? I did, I said. Her head snapped toward me, fury tightening every line in her face. You think some Denver lawyer and a stack of accusations can undo decades of community stewardship? I think facts can, I said. Her jaw clenched. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Neither do you, I replied. Dalton stepped between us. Ms. Delroy, until the county concludes its investigation, you have no authority on this property. I suggest you return home. Her voice dropped to a hiss. You're making a mistake, Sheriff. That's enough, Dalton said. For a moment she looked like she might lash out, verbally, legally, or otherwise. But then she spun on her heel and stormed back to her car. Tires spat gravel as she sped down the mountain road. Dalton watched her go, then muttered, She knows something's wrong. She's panicking. I nodded. Good. He glanced at the binder tucked under my arm. Cole, if half the evidence in there is what you say it is, you're not just fighting an HOA. You're exposing something big. Sheriff, I said, it's all in there. Every violation slip, every false report, every county filing she falsified, and every link to Carver's land buys. Dalton rubbed the back of his neck. I can't intervene yet, but I can pay attention, and I'm paying attention now. That was the biggest shift of all. The sheriff, once neutral at best, dismissive at worst, was starting to see the truth, and Marcia knew it. The explosion continued that afternoon. 3 residents, people I'd never met, approached my cabin with nervous looks. Mr. Harrington? One man asked. Is it true the county is investigating the HOA? Word was spreading. By 5 p.m., Tessa texted me. Marcia's calling an emergency HOA meeting tomorrow. Says she's going to set the record straight. This is her trying to regain control. Be ready. Ready for what? A character assassination? A smear campaign? A staged emotional breakdown? Didn't matter. She was losing grip. And people who are losing grip always make reckless moves. At 7:44 p.m., Evan called. The clerk responded, he said. They found financial ties between Delroy and Carver in previous filings. Not criminal yet, but enough to trigger a deeper review. And the sheriff? I asked. I spoke to him. He's seen the motion. He's not calling your disputes civil noise anymore. He knows this is something else. I stood by the window, looking out at the ridge, where Marcia's volunteers once roamed freely. Evan, I said, we just shifted the entire balance. Yes, he replied. And that means one thing. She's going to retaliate. Hard. I exhaled. Let her. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, the scale had tipped. I wasn't the one being cornered anymore. Tomorrow, Marcia would step into the spotlight at her emergency meeting, expecting to humiliate me. But tomorrow, the community would hear a very different story. A story backed by documents, timelines, county reviews, and a sheriff who finally saw the truth. And so, the eruption had started. The collapse was next. By morning, the entire town buzzed with rumors. Cars passed my driveway slower than usual. People who'd never looked twice at me before now glanced up with hesitation, curiosity, or thinly veiled fear. Word traveled fast in mountain communities, and nothing traveled faster than the idea that the Elk Ridge Preservation HOA might be under state review. At 9:03 a.m., Tessa texted, Town Hall, 6 p.m., she's going after you publicly. No surprise. When people like Marcia lose control, they don't retreat, they amplify. By 5:30, I arrived early enough to take a seat in the back row. I wanted a clear view of everything. The hall filled quickly. Retirees, young families, hikers who owned seasonal cabins, and even ranchers from lower in the valley. About 60 people in all. Conversations hummed through the room. Says the sheriff was at her door. Heard the county froze her claim. What if she's been lying for years? I trusted her. At 6:01, the double doors swung open. Marcia Delroy entered like she expected applause, clipboard pressed against her blazer. Hair perfectly arranged. Smile polished but trembling at the edges. She approached the podium and tapped the microphone, clearing her throat dramatically. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, she began. There has been a misunderstanding in our community, and I'm here to correct it. She didn't look at the audience. She looked directly at me. Certain individuals, she continued, have attempted to undermine preservation efforts through legal manipulation and misinformation. There it was, the attempted public execution. I have dedicated 15 years to protecting Elk Ridge from predatory buyers, outsiders who see profit, not heritage. Several heads nodded reflexively. Old loyalties die slow. And now, she said, voice rising theatrically, my work is being attacked by someone who has lived here less than a month. The crowd murmured. She had their attention. She pushed harder. This man, Mr. Harrington, has accused me of fraud, of abuse, of harassment, all because he refuses to follow established preservation protocols. A few people turned to look at me, curious, uncertain. Good. Doubt was a foothold. Marcia continued. He is attempting to weaponize the county against our community, using a Denver attorney, an outsider no less, to destabilize what we have built. Her framing was deliberate. Us versus him. Divide and control. She lifted a page from her clipboard. Here are the violations he has ignored. Unauthorized occupancy, environmental disruption, structural neglect. Show the dates, called a voice from the middle rows. Everyone turned. It was Tessa. Calm, steady, hands folded loosely in front of her. Marcia stiffened. Excuse me? Show the dates, Tessa repeated. Because those violations started the same week he moved in, and not a day before. Funny, for an abandoned house you supposedly cared for. A ripple of whispers spread. Marcia's smile thinned like paper in a fire. Miss Crane, if you have concerns, you may speak after I've— No, another voice said. An older man rose from the left side. I'd like to hear her now. Marcia froze, control slipping. Tessa stepped into the aisle. For years I watched families move up here excited, hopeful, and then suddenly they'd complain about harassment, about pressure, about violations that made no sense. And within months, they'd move away. She glanced toward me. Cole isn't the first. He's just the first who fought back. Murmurs grew louder. Someone whispered, she did that to the Wilsons. Another said, and the Marsh family. Color drained from Marcia's face. This is nonsense, she snapped. I have always acted within the law. The timing could not have been better. The doors opened again. Sheriff Ray Dalton entered, holding a manila envelope stamped with the county seal. He walked straight to the podium and stood beside Marcia. Sheriff, she said with relief, please explain to these people that this is just a— Dalton held up a hand. Ms. Delroy, I'm here on official county business. Silence swallowed the room whole. He opened the envelope and removed a single-page notice. This is a temporary administrative order issued by the county clerk's office, Dalton announced. Effective immediately. Your caretaker claim over the Harrington property is revoked pending investigation. A stunned gasp swept through the hall. Marcia took a step back. What? No, that's impossible. My claim was approved years ago. Dalton continued reading, ignoring her growing panic. Furthermore, you are prohibited from entering or monitoring the Harrington property until the investigation concludes. Whispers rose into open conversation. People leaned toward one another, questioning, connecting dots, revisiting memories. The mask shattered. No, she shouted, grabbing Dalton's arm. You don't understand. He is manipulating the system. He's using lawyers to... Dalton pulled his arm free. Ms. Delroy, you need to calm down. Everything I've done has been for this community, she screamed. And that was the moment the crowd turned. A woman stood. Then why did 3 families lose their homes after dealing with you? A man added, why did my cousin sell at half-market value because you flooded him with violations? Another voice, why does Carver buy every property you preserve? The questions came like stones thrown through stained glass. Marcia's composure crumbled entirely. You're all ungrateful. I protected you. I saved this town from outsiders. Then why are you the one under investigation? Someone shouted. She had no answer. Dalton stepped forward, lowering his voice but amplifying its impact. Ms. Delroy, please step away from the podium. The authority in his tone left no room for challenge. Marcia stared at the crowd, at the faces that once adored her, feared her, followed her. But not anymore. Not after today. She backed away slowly, clipboard trembling, eyes darting for an exit, for a lifeline, for anything that might salvage her unraveling power. There was none. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked small. The hall fell quiet as Dalton folded the county order and handed it to me. Mr. Harrington, he said, the property is yours, fully, legally, without dispute until the county concludes its investigation. I nodded. Thank you, Sheriff. He leaned in slightly. Stay alert. She's cornered now, and cornered people do unpredictable things. As he stepped back, the townspeople's eyes shifted toward me. Not with suspicion this time, but with apology, curiosity, even respect. But the most powerful moment was this. Neil Carver slipping out the back door, trying not to be seen. I saw him. So did Dalton. The empire had cracked, and tomorrow it would break wide open. The morning after the town hall was sharper, quieter, and heavier than anything that came before it. When I stepped onto my porch, the world didn't feel hostile anymore. It felt watchful, like the mountain itself was waiting to see what would happen next. At 8:12 a.m., gravel crunched under tires. Sheriff Dalton's cruiser pulled up my driveway with a purpose that needed no explanation. He stepped out holding a single-page document, the same county seal stamped at the top, but this one carried more weight than anything yet delivered. Cole, he said, it's time. He handed me the paper. Caretaker claim permanently revoked. Immediate vacation required within 72 hours. Then, a second line. Further investigation pending regarding fraudulent filings, misuse of preservation authority, and financial impropriety. It wasn't a suggestion. It was the end of an era. I nodded slowly. So that's it. She's done. Dalton exhaled. This order ends her control. But the investigation, that's what ends her operation. We both turned as a familiar silver SUV tore up the road, brakes screeching. Marcia Delroy stepped out holding a folder bulging with documents, her hair disheveled, her breath uneven, not the polished authority she'd always displayed. You can't do this, she barked, marching toward Dalton. You can't just erase 15 years of community service. No one erased anything, Dalton said evenly. The county found violations. That's all. These claims are lies, she snarled. Fabrications. He's manipulating all of you. I met her rage with calm. Everything filed was verifiable, Marcia. Every document, every timestamp, every complaint you weaponized. You think you've won? She hissed. You think you've beaten me? You have no idea how deep this goes. Dalton stepped between us. Ms. Delroy, the order is final, and if you interfere with the investigation, I'll add obstruction to the list. Her face contorted, a mix of fury and disbelief. For the first time, she seemed small. No clipboard armor, no volunteer entourage, no crowd to manipulate. just a person whose lies had finally caught up. Dalton cleared his throat. There's more. He handed me a second page. My eyes scanned the headline. State Real Estate Commission. Formal Review of Elk Ridge Preservation. HOA initiated. Below it were two names highlighted in yellow. Marcia Delroy, President Neil Carver, financial consultant. The room at the town hall had been the collapse. This was the burial. When Dalton left, I called Evan immediately. They added Carver, I told him. Good, he replied. That means the commission found the land flip pattern, and if they verified the financial tie between him and Marcia, this will escalate fast. What happens next? I asked. Public audits, he said. Forced disclosure. Frozen accounts. The HOA board will fracture. Carver won't stick around. He'll protect himself. As if summoned by the mention of his name, a black pickup crept down the road. Neil Carver sat behind the wheel, sunglasses on, jaw clenched. He drove slowly past my cabin, not stopping, not waving, just looking, measuring, calculating. He didn't look like a man in control. He looked like a man wondering how much evidence the state had already found. By noon, residents began showing up at my gate. Not angry, not hostile, but apologetic. Mr. Harrington, we didn't know. Marcia said you were dangerous. We believed her. She did this to the Marsh family too. Should have seen it sooner. Each conversation chipped away at the narrative Marcia had built. Now they saw her for what she was. Not a protector of tradition, but a predator disguised as one. Tessa arrived last. You did it, she said softly. I didn't think anyone could stand up to her. I didn't do it alone, I said. You started it. You believed her victims. She looked away, the weight of old guilt flickering across her face. Better late than never, I guess. At 3:47 p.m., the final blow arrived. An email from Evan. Subject line, audit authorized. He called seconds later. Cole, listen carefully, he said. The state is freezing HOA accounts and demanding a full ledger review. This is rare. Very rare. What does it mean? I asked. It means the HOA as you know it, the one she weaponized, won't survive the week. And Carver? Once they dig into his LLC filings, he'll have nowhere to hide. I walked to the window, looking out over the land I'd nearly lost. The mountain wind moved through the pines, shifting shadows across the property line. My property line. Evan, I said quietly, I think it's finally turning. No, he corrected. It has turned. At sunset, a final confrontation brewed. Marcia returned, but not with the fury she carried earlier. She stepped out of her SUV slowly, shoulders hunched, hair loose, eyes hollow. She walked up to the porch without a clipboard, without papers, just a thin envelope in her hand. I want you to understand something, she said, voice strained. I built this community. I kept it alive. I held this place together when investors wanted to chop it into vacation rentals. You held it together by destroying people, I said. By lying, threatening, stealing homes. They didn't appreciate what I was protecting, she whispered. And you used them, I replied. Every last one. Her jaw trembled. She looked down at the envelope, then held it out to me. That's a notice, she said. My lawyer is withdrawing representation. And Carver? He cut ties. The predator had been abandoned by her pack. I'll challenge their findings, she insisted weakly. I'll appeal, You won't, I said, calm but firm, because they have everything, and you know it. Her eyes glistened, not with remorse, just the shock of a toppled queen. You think you saved this place? She whispered. You think you're the hero? No, I said. I just stopped you. She turned away, shoulders shaking, and returned to her SUV. The engine revved, and she sped off into the fading light. The mountain exhaled behind her. That night, I received the official notice from the state. Full audit of HOA finances and land transactions authorized. Temporary dissolution pending review. It was the final twist. The one that toppled her entire kingdom, not just her claim over my home. Tomorrow, enforcement would begin. Tomorrow, the HOA's reign would end. And tomorrow, she would face the consequences she'd outrun for years. But for the first time since I bought the house, I slept without looking over my shoulder. The mountain was mine again. The following morning, the quiet didn't feel heavy or tense. It felt earned. No patrol car creeping up the road. No HOA volunteers pretending to monitor wildlife. No clipped voice on my voicemail accusing me of imaginary violations. The harassment had stopped cold, because the power behind it had been stripped away. At 9:03 a.m., Sheriff Dalton returned. Not hurried, not tense, just carrying a clipboard and a neutral expression. The kind he used when something official was about to be closed out permanently. "Cole," he said, stepping out of the cruiser. "You ready for this?" I nodded. "Let's finish it." Behind him, a county vehicle pulled up, followed by a small state compliance unit. Plain sedans, no lights, no noise, just quiet authority, the kind Marcia could never manipulate. Dalton motioned toward the road. "She's on her way, and she doesn't have a choice." It took 5 minutes before her SUV appeared, climbing the gravel drive slower than ever before. When she stopped, she didn't get out right away. No clipboard, no folder, no performance, just a defeated silhouette behind the wheel. Finally, she emerged, still trying to hold herself upright, still grasping at the scraps of control she once wielded effortlessly. "Let's get this over with," she muttered. The county officer stepped forward. "Ms. Delroy, per the order issued, you are required to vacate the property immediately. Additionally, you are under review for misuse of preservation authority and potential financial misconduct. You have been notified of all deadlines." Her jaw tightened. "This is absurd." "No," Dalton said, voice firm. "This is accountability." She blinked hard, swallowing whatever argument she wanted to make. Then she turned toward me. "You think this makes you a hero?" she whispered. "You think you understand what it takes to run a community up here?" I stepped closer. Not aggressive, just steady. "I understand you used fear to control people," I said. "I understand you drove families out so your partner could buy their homes for pennies. And I understand you never expected anyone to fight back." Her lips trembled, but she didn't respond. She walked to her SUV, opened the back, and removed the last remnants of her presence. 2 binders, a box of envelopes, a wooden sign that once read, "Caretaker Office." She clutched it awkwardly, as if finally realizing it never meant anything. When her SUV rolled back down the mountain, there was no anger in the air, only closure. An hour later, the state inspector approached me. "Mr. Harrington, we'll be conducting interviews with community members over the next month. Financial audits will take longer, possibly a year, but effective immediately, the Elk Ridge Preservation HOA is dissolved." The word hit harder than expected. Dissolved. Gone. The force that had tried to take my home, rewrite my rights, and grind me into submission was officially dead. I nodded slowly. "Thank you." "You did the right thing documenting everything," the inspector added. "It made this possible." Dalton gave me a subtle, approving nod before driving back down the road. I stood alone on the porch, looking out over the land that had nearly been stolen through technicalities and intimidation. This time, nothing threatened it, nothing hung over me. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effects moved through the entire ridge. Residents who once whispered apologies now openly condemned Marcia's tactics. Past victims, families pressured into selling, were contacted by state investigators. Some even formed an informal support circle, meeting at Tessa's place to compare experiences, timelines, and losses. Tessa approached me one afternoon, hands in her jacket pockets. "You changed things up here," she said. Not dramatic, not emotional, just honest. "I just held them to their own rules," I replied. "Yeah," she said. "No one ever did that before." We looked out toward the ridge, once blanketed by fear of HOA retaliation, and now open, quiet, almost hopeful. "What happens next?" she asked. I smiled. "People get their lives back." Evan called with updates every few days. "Carver's accounts are frozen," he reported. "They found irregularities in 3 property transfers, maybe more." "Will he be charged?" I asked. "Hard to say," Evan replied. "But he won't be doing business around here again." "And Marcia?" "Civil penalties," he said. "Maybe worse. But the important part, she'll never run another HOA, not anywhere in the state." I exhaled slowly. Not because I wanted revenge, but because justice had boundaries, and hers had finally closed in around her. 1 month later, I hung the deed to the mountain house inside the living room, framed, centered, and no longer at risk of being questioned. The next morning, I planted 3 young aspens near the porch, not because I needed landscaping, but because the land deserved something living, something rooted, something growing where her violation notices once flapped in the wind. That afternoon, I sat on the front steps, watching the sunlight cut across the ridge. The house wasn't abandoned anymore. The land wasn't threatened. And I wasn't running or defending or proving anything. This was home. Fully, finally, unquestionably. I murmured to the mountain, the house, the silence around me. Some homes aren't taken. They're defended. Justice didn't just settle. It stayed. And so did I. If you've ever stood your ground against folks who thought they could walk over you, drop the word justice in the comments so I know I'm not the only one. And if stories about dignity, land, and holding the line feel like home to you, hit that subscribe button and stick around. There's more truth and grit on the way.